everyone, how's it going? For some time now, I've been working on and off with the pursuit of getting further into both 2D and 3D art. I've been posting on both Twitter and Blue Sky for my creations, as well as others on YouTube as well. It's a way for me to share what I've made on top of giving myself an incentive to continue creating something and keep going with it. If I want to continue with this channel and give it more life support, I may as well polish the skills I want to develop towards it. In the case of typing, well, I've dabbled with typing websites like TypeRacer and MonkeyType in the past. I've never really been that fast, and the highest that I could go at one point was 106 words per minute. Compared to a lot of people though, that's not very fast at all. Like anything else though, I knew that I had the capability to increase that number with daily and consistent practice in the same way that I approached drawing pixel art and learning 3D modeling. Typing is something that we all do as a means to communicate or get something done, but how many use it for the purposes of gaming? Well, that's where typing-based games come in. Basically, they employ the gamification method of taking a useful and transferable skill and then apply it within game logic, building a fun gameplay loop surrounding said skill and giving players an opportunity to practice it without paying more for than the game itself. Part of learning something, after all, is only fully realized when you have a means to practice what you've learned. And that's what simulators or educational-based games can do to some degree. In the case of learning to type or merely improving your typing during specific conditions, typing games can give players an incentive to be critical about their typing speed as well as their accuracy, always looking for opportunities for improvement. With today's video, I'm going to mostly be talking about one particular franchise, and it's one that I've known about but never really played until recently, and that is the Typing of the Dead series. Typing of the Dead is an offshoot modification based on the House of the Dead series, which was what happened when you took the idea of Resident Evil, slot it into an arcade machine, and give the players a light gun instead of a controller. Back in those days, arcades were still pretty popular, and today in some places across the world. The light gun genre, as some would call it, led to many coins inside the system, giving kids more chances to shoot more mutants in the face. The first game was somewhat campy but atmospheric in its presentation, with some great enemy and boss designs to boot, on top of the mansion-based setting reminiscent of the first Resident Evil. It would eventually be remade a long time later down the track, but before that would come other installments that would somewhat shift the franchise in different directions, and one of those shifts would gear towards the use of the keyboard, hence the title, The Typing of the Dead. The first Typing of the Dead game was based off of the second House of the Dead game, but with some fundamental differences. For starters, the game's pacing is changed to somewhat make it more manageable for the typing-based gameplay that modifies the original game's experience. 2, the tone is even less serious than it already was because of the game's pivotal display of acting, on top of the fact that the characters presented are wiping out all of the mutants with literal keyboards on the screen, with Dreamcast consoles as well on their back. Oh, and that's another thing. The Dreamcast console would also get a port of the first Typing of the Dead game, and would even have a dedicated keyboard that you could use with it, which was similar to how there were keyboards at the arcades for this game. If you've played the original House of the Dead 2, then Typing of the Dead is basically the same thing, with some variations, of course. In it, you type the corresponding words as quick as you can, before the mutants get close enough to take a swipe at you. In each mission, you'll also have the means to pick up items to help you during trickier key types, as well as acquiring more points for your overall score. It was representative of an age where arcade games were designed to be difficult and challenging and replayable, and while it's somewhat manageable in the first 2 or 3 levels, you get overwhelmed pretty quickly if your typing skills and hand-eye coordination isn't up to speed. The House of the Dead counterparts, at least from my first experience with the original and remake, weren't that easy either initially in terms of the challenge, but were engaging enough to make me want to keep pushing forward and blasting mutants away like it was in the 90s again. Typing the Dead offers the same deal, finding yourself pitted against mutants as well as various bosses with weak points and unique mechanics behind each fight. For example, in the first Typing of the Dead, you end up fighting a trio of creatures that ask you questions, and you have to answer correctly and quickly in order to damage it. But getting the wrong answer or not answering does the opposite and you take damage. Other bosses in the first Typing of the Dead also have their own quirks and mechanics, but over time and after a few replays, you'll eventually memorize the timing required to get the keystrokes in there before it's too late. The game was well received at the time amongst people, has become a treasured piece of media among those that still own a Dreamcast, and has become a cult classic over the years. But what the game also does really well too is how it makes the experience of typing fun, while still developing a cognitive connection to educating the player in the learning of typing, arranging sentences by typing along, quick and concise keystrokes corresponding to the screen prompts, and the natural improvements to typing speed. What the first game did to keep the players challenged and engaged was that it would gradually increase the range of words thrown at you if you were making progress throughout its story and you were handling it pretty well. When the player gets punished through damage or continues, the word counts somewhat revert a bit, and the use of tranquilizers can also assist in the progression of levels, especially when you're at a stage where difficult enemies have very long sentences to type in, as well as the use of grenades and molotovs that can wipe enemies or damage bosses. This challenge aspect though, and the frequency of combat tied with the key prompts, is what also added not only a deadline to your typing efforts, but also gave players an incentive to type faster and more accurately. People in the education system for decades have tried to blend the conventional methods of teaching and apply it into a new way of thinking where they understand that the kid desires to have fun and want to play. Whether it's through board games or team-based activities or even learning to play or make games on the computer, teachers would create this connection and balance between fun and education for their students. This method dates back a very long time and has been used in different corners of society and different functions of civilizations. But nowadays, a more familiar term has propagated across the internet and social media, which is known now as gamification. Gamification is the application of using game logic towards real-life scenarios or tasks. People set goals every day to try to be productive, and some will treat it like a game, a means to level up. Apps like Habitica, Duolingo, Khan Academy, and LifeUp have in their own way created a source of learning that makes you feel like you're not only playing a game, but you're also learning something and are moving forward in terms of becoming smarter and more productive. Typing of the Dead could be treated as such as well. After all, it does base itself around an everyday skill that's useful and transferable across any field that requires a sharp mind. Typing well is something that requires a degree of patience and dedication, and while Typing of the Dead isn't going to make you a Nobel Prize winner, the mere enjoyment from typing while having fun is important enough to instill the interest to get better at typing in the first place. This is part of the game's charm and why I personally really enjoy playing Typing of the Dead, because even when I screw up and fail and have to try again, I know that the session hasn't been a complete waste. When people make a conscious effort to practice their typing or practice any skill of interest, they end up being night and day in the long run compared to those that don't really go beyond just the basics. Typing of the Dead is incredibly campy and cheesy. Its voice acting is just divine. It's some of the best I've ever had the pleasure to listen to.
I've been waiting for you, friends.
Goldman! Do you know what you're doing?
I'm fully aware of what I'm doing. Can't you see? Man committed a sin, disturbing the life cycle of nature. The original sin that man is responsible to protect the life cycle.
And again, it still has that old school 90s charm behind it through its visuals and its enemy designs. Eventually, it would get another release called Typing the Dead Overkill, which was based off of the House of the Dead Overkill. But there was also a sequel prior to it called The Typing of the Dead 2, but it was only ever released in Japan, and I didn't even know it existed until I stumbled upon a video of it on YouTube. Overkill was like the first game, but more forgiving due to having a larger health bar and less reliance on symbols, as well as, some power-ups like the slow-mo that you can use to give yourself more time to press the keys to finish off the mutants. It's a different contrast to the first Typing the Dead, where the original game was more of a reflection of quick and straight to the point arcade sessions with some light storytelling alongside challenging gameplay to boot. But Typing of the Dead Overkill has a more modernized take on the same concept and even has difficulty options for an easier or harder experience. I really enjoyed Overkill even though the F word is incredibly overused, so abused that it gives the Wolf of Wall Street movie a run for its money. It has the same comedy horror vibe that the first game had, but with a Tarantino-inspired Grindhouse twist to it. If you've ever watched Grindhouse movies, then this game has that going for it. It's kind of fucked up, but you're never in a position to take it seriously because neither were the writers taking it seriously with this one. They were just having fun with the script. In any event, Overkill was a fun time and does still hold some of the typing benefits that carry over to other interests. Gamifying a skill is important and useful and fun because it presents the idea of changing the way you think about something. Even something as simple as typing on the keyboard can be transformed into a fun and engaging session, and there are plenty of them out there now if you know where to look. They all build around the idea of typing and apply it as a core gameplay mechanic, keeping players engaged, in check, learning, improving, and having fun at the same time. Simply just learning isn't going to always work, and sometimes a more creative approach is needed to either rekindle or create interest for someone who is open to learning or relearning again. The Typing of the Dead helped kickstart the idea of turning keyboard typing into a game, while making the process of key typing satisfying, educational, and enjoyable. It was a game that was also seen as edutainment, a source of entertainment and education, putting two and two together to give people the idea that, hey, typing sentences and shooting hordes of mutants and monsters sounds like a blast, and I can learn how to type while doing it. However, it is a shame that the series hasn't really seen a comeback since Overkill, but other typing games, as well as another one that I recently covered called Blood Typers, have been carrying the torch. There are lots of games out there that gamify the idea of wanting to get better at something, and it's technically something that's not as recent as people think. It's already been around for a very, very long time, in a matter of speaking, through chess, war games during the times of warring colonial nations, board games, and so on. Typing the Dead is just one example out of many others that teaches different skills and subjects. This one just happens to be about improving at typing. In spite of its potential to teach someone, you still may not like the game anyway, and we are lucky to have alternatives that have helped many get better at something that's relatively simple but difficult to consistently get good at. Give Typing of the Dead a go, especially if you like 90s horror games and want something that's unique and educational at the same time. Thanks for watching.